Video game consoles. Some of them are fun and some of them f***ing Greek. Some sell amazingly and some sell terribly. You might expect that the consoles that sell terribly are because they're just not good. It's not really always the case, as some consoles that sold badly are considered to be actually not bad at all. It's like a homeless guy that smells good. Like take the Wii U for example. The Wii U sold pretty damn badly, but it was not at all a bad console. I feel like one of the main reasons why it sold badly is because nobody knew what this f***ing thing was. The main reason why the original Wii was such a success is because it appealed to people like Uncle Tony who didn't know rat about video games. Try putting yourself in Uncle Tony's shoes here for a minute. Does this look appealing to you? You wouldn't even think that the Wii U itself is a new console because it just looks way too similar to the pre-existing Wii. You might think that the gamepad is just an accessory for the Wii. But yeah, other than being a commercial flop, the Wii U is not a bad console because of its games. Shitty gimmick, great games. Just like a homeless person that smells good. Homeless, yes, but that doesn't change the fact that he smells f***ing great. What the f*** is wrong with me? Anyways, let me stop talking about the Wii U, because apparently when it comes to the Wii U, I just can't help but write a f***ing essay. So yeah, let's just focus on this video's topic, which is the worst selling video game consoles of all time. Keep in mind though, this video won't include every badly selling console. This video will include some of the pretty well known shitty consoles and some very obscure shitty consoles. Let's just get this one out of the way. The Virtual Boy. It would not be a video about poorly selling consoles without the good old Virtual Boy. It sold a total of 770,000 units. Here's a handy dandy little graph I made to keep track of the sales and see how much they compare to my favorite disappointment, the Wii U. The Virtual Boy was released on August 14th, 1995 in North America. It released with 4 launch titles, Mario's Tennis, Red Alarm, Tellero Boxer, and Galactic Pinball. And actually, that's not a bad amount of games. If you bought this thing back in 95, they'll definitely keep you busy. Fun fact though, that's actually twice as many as the N64. Ouch. Alright, now for a history lesson about the Virtual Boy, since it's actually pretty damn interesting. Just so we don't get bored though, here's some Subway Surfers gameplay. Oh, and some Minecraft parkour gameplay as well, because why not? And also some generic short video style subtitles to help you understand what I'm saying. Oh, and also let me make this video into a phone format, since you're probably watching this on a phone right now anyways. Yeah, no, just kidding, I'm never stooping that low. I have standards. Okay, all jokes aside, let's get to the actual subject. I'll try to explain as easily as I can though, so that NPCs like you and I could understand it well. In 1985, a company called RTI produced a stereoscopic head tracking prototype called the Private Eye. Stereoscopic means that it displays 2 pictures at slightly different angles viewed at the same time, creating an impression of depth. And head tracking, well, you know how in VR games if you move your head in real life, you move your head in game? Yeah. RTI showed off the Private Eye to some companies because they wanted some funding. One of those companies was actually Sega, who declined this tech because it could only display one color, and they were also concerned about motion sickness. Nintendo received the Private Eye, and the legendary Gunpei Yokoi, who invented the Game & Watch and the Game Boy, saw this as an opportunity. He thought this was a unique technology that others would find difficult to emulate, and the resulting console that he would make out of this technology would enhance Nintendo's reputation as an innovator, and he also wanted to encourage more creativity in the video game scene. Nintendo then entered into an exclusive agreement with RTI to license the technology for its displays. That is when they started work on the Virtual Boy, codenaming it VR32. Later in development, Nintendo was concerned about motion sickness, so they took away the head tracking functionality altogether. And on August 14th, 1995, the Virtual Boy finally released. But Gunpei Yokoi didn't really want it to release that early because the console hasn't really reached its full potential. But Nintendo wanted to release it anyway so that they could focus their resources on the upcoming N64. At release, Nintendo of America projected that it would sell 1.5 million units by the end of the year. Yikes. Nintendo then partnered with NBC and Blockbuster, a popular chain at the time for renting movies, video games, and as such. Viewers on NBC at the time were basically told to go to Blockbuster and rent the Virtual Boy for only $10. And after the renters returned the Virtual Boy, they received a $10 coupon, which seems like a pretty decent deal, until you think about the fact that, well, you already spent $10 when you rented the Virtual Boy. This promotion was pretty popular, which you may think it would be a good thing, but it was actually the complete opposite, as the people who tried the Virtual Boy for $10 were able to see how low-key kind of shit it was, which definitely hurt the sales of the console. So yeah, long story short, the Virtual Boy was not that good. Alright, next console. The Ouya. What is the Ouya? You probably didn't ask, but I'm telling you anyway. The Ouya is an Android-based micro console, meaning that it's typically powered by low-cost hardware, which in turn makes the price lower. The Ouya project was founded by Julia Ehrman, who is an American soccer executive and entrepreneur who is president of Angel City FC, a national women's soccer league team based in Los Angeles, California, that Ehrman also co-founded. Damn. from Ouya to soccer, pretty damn impressive, not gonna lie, considering how well or not well the micro console did. The Ouya was announced on July 3rd, 2012 as a brand new home video game console. And on July 10th, Ouya Inc. started a Kickstarter campaign and the goal was $950,000. And they wanted to reach it within 1 month. Oh, they reached it alright. Within 8 hours. According to Kickstarter, the Ouya holds the record for the best first-day performance of any project hosted to date. But how? Why were so many people interested in this? The Ouya ran a version of Android, and rooting the operating system was actually encouraged. Rooting, if you didn't know, is a pretty big no-no and definitely not encouraged by some of the big phone companies. Rooting means that you acquire administrator privileges over your operating system, making you do actions that were previously locked or unavailable. If you've ever heard of jailbreaking iPhones, it's basically the same thing. Another example is that it's basically kind of like putting homebrew on your Nintendo 3DS or Nintendo Wii or whatever. And the console's design also encouraged people to tear it down, allowing people to tinker with it, modify it, and do basically whatever they wanted. All the Ouya units were also development kits, allowing any Ouya user to be a developer without any licensing fees. The Ouya was also priced at $99, which doesn't seem like a bad price at all first. Seems pretty sweet, right? Before the console even released, there were people who were pretty skeptical of the idea that a brand new rando company could deliver an actual successful video game console. Microcons. Anyways, so why did it fail? Huge thanks to this dude on Reddit for saving me a good amount of time by making a full list of why the Ouya failed. Here are a few highlights of that list. People did not receive the Ouya by the time the company promised they would, which, to be honest, I feel like is pretty common with crowdfunded projects, unfortunately. Oh, and also, they never apologized. Apparently the Wi-Fi on the Ouya f***ing reeked. The controllers also f***ing reeked, and Julie Ehrman never apparently took any responsibility for the previously stated reasons. There are just tons of other reasons to the point where I could easily make an entire video on the Ouya from just how f***ing shit it was. So yeah, in conclusion, the Ouya made a ton of money, but it turned out to be trash. It sold around 200,000 units and was discontinued only 2 years after release. Here's the graph I made earlier to keep track of which console sold the least. Wow, riveting. The Atari Jaguar. Just by showing you the controller, you can probably tell that this thing f***ing reeked. The Jaguar was released on November 23rd, 1993 in North America. Apparently this thing sold no more than 150,000 units. If the Wii U was considered a wet fart for Nintendo, considering it sold around 30 million units, and yes, I do know that from the top of my head, because why wouldn't I, then what does that make the Atari Jaguar? Anyways, at first, the console was initially only available in New York City and San Francisco with the slogan, "Get Bit by Jaguar." What the f*** kind of slogan is that? Like, were their target audience masochists? I don't want to f***ing feel pain. The Jaguar then actually released nationwide about 6 months later in early 1984. This thing was marketed as the world's first 64-bit console, but apparently, that's not f***ing true. You see, you know shit's about to go down when people drop the UC. The Jaguar had 2 different 32-bit processors that worked in tandem, the Motorola 680,000 and the Tom and Jerry, which was named like that for reasons that are beyond my comprehension. And technically, if you add up the bit count of the 2 processors, you do get 64 bits. But still, that's f***ing dumb. Electronic Gaming Monthly, a gaming magazine at the time, made the comment that if Sega did the math for the Sega Saturn the way Atari did the math for the 64-bit Jaguar system, the Sega Saturn would be a 112-bit monster of a machine. So other than the 64-bit scandal, the Jaguar failed for a variety of reasons, some of which were shitty marketing, a lack of games that took full advantage of the console's power, and competition with the Sega Genesis, the SNES, and the PlayStation 1. Alright, next up... oh, right. Graph. Okay, now we're starting to get into the real stinkers, the bottom of the bargain bin barrel, if you will. Next up, the RCA Studio 2. What? Yeah, not a lot is known about this console. Even the Wikipedia page doesn't have that much info. The Studio 2 was a console made by RCA that released in January of 1977. This thing had black and white graphics and the controls were built into the console itself and were 10-button keypads. Ew. This thing had 5 included games, with other games releasing in the form of cartridges. This console was kind of obsolete at launch thanks to the Fairchild Channel F, which sold pretty terribly for today's standards, but for back in the 70s, it was considered a pretty decent success, which is why it's not on this list. Game consoles back then were seen as no more than toys. And also there was this pretty niche little console called the Atari 2600 that released 10 months after the Studio 2, which was superior to both the Fairchild Channel F and the Studio 2. So, how much did this thing sell? It apparently sold somewhere between 53 and 64,000 units. Ouch. There isn't much info about this console, but there is some fairly interesting history. Joyce Weisbecker, I hope I pronounced that name right, the daughter of the Studio 2's designer, was pretty familiar with computers and all that stuff by the time she graduated from high school in '76. So she decided to make 2 games for the Studio 2, making her the first ever woman to develop a commercial video game. Pretty neat. So yeah, that's basically it about the Studio 2. I don't have anything more to say. Graph. The Mattel Hyperscan. That's right, back in 2006, Mattel, out of all companies, attempted to enter the game console market. If you don't know who Mattel are, they're apparently the 2nd largest toy company in the world in terms of revenue, with number 1 being Lego. They also own Barbie and Hot Wheels. The makers of Barbie and Hot Wheels try to make a video game console. Let that sink in. They released the Hyperscan on October 23rd, 2006. This thing is interesting, to say the least. It includes an RFID scanner which reads and writes to special cards called IntelliCards. These cards can activate features in games. For example, in the game X-Men, you could get character cards which would unlock specific characters in the game. The games for this thing were called game packs, which came with the game itself and 6 IntelliCards. The game packs costed $20 each, and if you wanted more cards, you had to pay up. You had to buy $10 booster cards if you wanted any more cards. Sound familiar? Game features being locked behind a stupid paywall that can get expensive real fast, as this thing has a whopping 319 IntelliCards. What the f***? This was basically the f***ing 2006 equivalent of today's crappy mobile game microtransactions. This thing was truly ahead of its time, and not in a f***ing good way. So, crappy monetization aside, let's talk games. This thing had only 5 released games and 2 cancelled games. The released games were Ben 10, Interstellar Wrestling League, Marvel Heroes, Spider-Man, and X-Men. And yeah, as you can imagine, the reception was pretty bad as this thing sold only around 30,000 units. People criticized it for its clunky design, shitty game library, broken controls, long loading screens, and surprise surprise, the f***ing cards. I am so f***ing heated at this thing that I don't and will probably never f***ing own. Why? The Hyperscan only lasted for about a year, being discontinued by the end of 2007. Good. Alright, let's lighten up the mood with some graph time, baby. Let's go math. F*** math. Alright, we're nearing the end here with the Gizmondo. It was released on March 19th, 2005 by Tiger Telematics, a company that was based in Sweden. There was tons of marketing money put into this thing back in the day. I'm talking millions. The Gizmondo had high expectations because it had a ton of features and was set to compete against Nintendo and Sony. But apparently, the thing's release was delayed several times, putting even Cyberpunk to shame. And they also announced a widescreen version before the first iteration even released, which, understandably, resulted in low sales. There isn't an exact number, but it's less than 25,000 units. Oh, and also, the Swedish press revealed that several of the executives had criminal pasts. And also, the director of Gizmondo Europe was involved with the Swedish mafia. And yeah, by now you could probably tell why this thing had failed. By February of the next year, the company was forced into bankruptcy for amassing debt. $300 million of debt, to be precise. And a few weeks later, the director of Gizmondo Europe I mentioned earlier crashed a rare Ferrari car in California that was apparently owned by the Royal Bank of Scotland and was later jailed and afterwards deported for driving under the influence in connection with the car crash and other criminal offenses. I did not just make that up. I swear to God. Go look it up on Wikipedia. My God. Anyways, you might be asking, what about the Gizmondo widescreen? Yes, Half-Blood T, what about it? A question that probably hasn't been asked in almost 2 decades, and never came out. So yeah, judging it sold less than 25,000 units, the Gizmondo is probably the worst selling handheld game console. Or is it? Wait, before that, graph. Alright, oh boy, here we go. The time has finally come. Possibly the worst selling original console ever, and possibly even the most obscure, the Pomtex Portable Video Game Console, or the PVS for short, was a handheld game console that was developed by Palmtext and released in 1984. I couldn't find an exact release date, but I believe it was sometime around the first quarter of 1984. The company Palmtext started with Esmail Ahmed Hozor. I probably butchered the fuck out of that name. He came to the US looking for new business opportunities. He saw that at the time, the handheld console market was booming in Japan with the release of the Game & Watch. So, he managed to make a deal with Nintendo, who helped him import 300 Game & Watch systems so he could test sell them, if you will. The units sold without much trouble, so Esmail founded the company Palmtext on March 22, 1982, which became the first company to distribute Nintendo consoles in the US. So yeah, if that's true, for any of you in the US who have any Nintendo consoles, you have your boy Esmail to thank. They also imported other handheld consoles at the time, not just Nintendo ones. And at the end of 1982, when the demand and sales of handheld game consoles was at a peak, Palmtext decided to dip their toes into that market and make their own handheld game console. On January 30th, 1983, Palmtext announced the PVS while mentioning the multitude of features that this thing had, which were interchangeable cartridges, 3D effects on the screen due to several layers of glass providing depth, color graphics, sound control, and easily the biggest selling point of all, the inclusion of a pause button. In 1984, the final product was ready and was being showcased at CES, but honestly, the biggest reason for this thing's failure might have been simply poor timing, because at the time, the video game crash of 1983 was in full effect. The crash can honestly have a full video on its own, so for now we'll just focus on the PVS. Because of the crash, many were disinterested in the video game market, and no distributors wanted to carry this thing, which resulted in no orders being placed at CES. The PVS also had a problem with the screen being too dark and needing a substantial light source behind it to be able to actually see what you're playing. Basically the same problem as the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance, but I assume even worse. And to fix that problem, they created something called the Light Pack, which was a simple light box to provide light when needed. The console was then finally made available, costing $59.95 for the deluxe pack, which included the console, a game, and the light pack. And yeah, this thing was obviously a fail, selling only 5,000 units. Damn! Later in the same year, Palmtext filed for bankruptcy due to never financially recovering from a missed payment, which was basically the end of that company and the end of the short legacy of the PVS. Goodbye, my dear friend. You will not live on in our hearts because everyone is gonna f***ing forget about you again. And that was the history of the PVS. Kind of. All that yapping that I just did is just scratching the surface. I could make a whole damn video about this thing if I really wanted to. Maybe. Can't really say for sure if I will, though. And so, those were some of the most popular and most obscure console failures. Hopefully you enjoyed and hopefully you learned something new from this video. I certainly did. For example, I now probably know more things about the PVS than anyone within a 5,000 kilometer radius. How fun.